Sometimes the person you mock for having nothing is the same person who once had everything. This is the story of a black homeless man, once a world-famous racing legend, who was humiliated for asking for food. But when the truth came out, the entire town was left in shock. The town was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that made every creak of an old sign and every crunch of gravel underfoot sound louder than it should. Down the main street, pushing a battered shopping cart filled with scraps and worn-out clothes, walked David Cole. His coat was frayed at the sleeves, his shoes unevenly laced, and his eyes carried the weight of exhaustion and secrets. To most, he looked like just another drifter who had settled in their town for a few days before moving on. He walked with a certain calm, not asking for pity, not seeking attention, just trying to find something useful to do, something that might earn him a meal. When the scent of frying bacon and fresh coffee drifted through the air, David paused outside a small diner with chipped red paint and a neon sign that flickered between open and pen. Inside, locals crowded the booths, their laughter and conversation spilling out into the street. Pushing the door open gently, David stepped in, his presence drawing a sudden hush. Conversations quieted, eyes turned. The clinking of silverware seemed louder than before. Behind the counter stood Jake Miller, the broad-shouldered diner owner. With slicked-back hair and a permanent sneer ready on his lips, David cleared his throat softly, his voice polite but weary. "Sir, I don't want to trouble you, but if there's something broken here, a chair, a light, anything, I can fix it. All I ask is a plate of food." For a moment, there was silence. Then Jake chuckled, the kind of laugh that carried more cruelty than humor. "Fix something for food? This isn't some charity workshop, old man. You want to eat? Try getting a job like the rest of us." His words carried loudly through the diner, and a few customers snickered, taking his cue. "Besides," Jake added with a smirk, "what could you possibly fix? Your life's already broken." The sting of laughter rippled across the room, but David didn't lower his gaze. His dignity stayed intact, even if his clothes did not. At the far end of the counter, a young waitress named Lila Carter frowned at the scene. She had seen her share of travelers pass through, but something about this man's quiet strength unsettled her. When Jake turned away to pour coffee, she quickly wrapped a few slices of bread in a napkin and slid it across the counter toward David, whispering, "Here," before he notices. David's tired eyes softened with gratitude as he accepted the small kindness, nodding gently before stepping back outside. The day was bright, and the street buzzed with distant sounds of work. Hammers, engines, radios. Parked near the diner was a rusted pickup truck with its hood propped open. Ethan Walker, the town's mechanic, stood beside it with grease on his hands and impatience on his face. He muttered curses as he wiped his palms on a rag. David approached slowly, watching. After a few moments, he spoke, his voice even. "Your timing belts slipped. That's why it won't turn over. If you don't fix it soon, you'll be dealing with more than just a dead engine." Ethan glanced at him, scoffing. "And what would you know, old-timer? This isn't a shopping cart you're pushing around. It's a truck. Leave the mechanics to the men who actually work for a living." A few of Ethan's friends chuckled nearby, feeding his arrogance. David studied the engine a moment longer, then added calmly, "I know because I've handled engines that screamed at 200 miles an hour. If you can't hear the problem, maybe you're listening to the wrong thing." The laughter grew louder at his words, but there was something in the way he spoke that didn't sound like a lie. Ethan shook his head dismissively, waving him off, but unease flickered in his expression. Lila, who had stepped outside on her short break, watched from a distance. David's voice carried a certainty she couldn't ignore. As the afternoon wore on, David returned to his shopping cart parked by the alley. He sat quietly, tearing small pieces of the bread Lila had given him, eating slowly as though savoring each bite. The sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. From where she stood, Lila could see the way his hands moved, steady, precise, as though once accustomed to handling delicate machines. Something about him gnawed at her curiosity. When she finally approached him, intending to offer him a cup of coffee, her eyes caught sight of his worn canvas bag resting against the cart. From its half-open flap, an old newspaper clipping peeked out, yellowed with age. She bent slightly, catching the headline before David could pull it away. Her breath caught in her throat. The picture showed a much younger David, smiling wide, standing on a podium with a gleaming racing trophy in his hand. The headline read, "David Cole, America's rising star on the international circuit." Lila froze, her heart pounding. The man they had all mocked, the man Jake had laughed at, wasn't just another drifter. He had been somebody, a legend, a racer, a name once spoken in cheers. She looked up at him, questions burning in her mind, but David only lowered his gaze, tucking the clipping back into his bag as though it were a secret too heavy to carry in the open. For the first time, Lila realized there was far more to this man in shadows than anyone in town could imagine. The diner felt different the next morning. Lila couldn't shake the image of the faded newspaper clipping from her mind, and when her shift ended, she made her way to the small local office of the town's newspaper. Charlotte Hayes, the town's journalist, was known for her sharp instincts and curiosity that often got her into places most people would avoid. Lila approached, her nervously pulling the clipping from her apron pocket. "Charlotte, you need to see this," she whispered. Charlotte's brows arched as she unfolded the fragile paper, her eyes locking on the headline. She gasped, instantly recognizing the name, David Cole. Years ago, that name had dominated headlines around the world. He wasn't just a racer. He had been America's pride, a man who conquered circuits across Europe with a talent that seemed superhuman. Charlotte remembered the sudden mystery of his disappearance, how he had vanished after a tragic twist in his personal life. And now, here he was, reduced to a drifter in her own small town. That night, Charlotte sat at her desk, pulling up old archives and grainy photographs of David's glory days. She saw images of him grinning with champagne after a race in Monaco, lifting trophies in Germany, standing tall beside cars that roared like thunder. But then came the darker headlines. Champion faces heartbreak. Racer loses family in drunk driving tragedy. The details struck her hard. David's wife and young daughter had been killed when a drunk driver ran a red light. The loss shattered him, and soon after he walked away from fame, sponsors, and fortune, disappearing from the public eye. Charlotte leaned back, her heart heavy. It made sense now. His silence, his sadness, the look in his eyes. Meanwhile, in town, whispers grew louder. Jake, still bitter about the way Lila defied him, sneered to customers that the homeless man was nothing more than a liar carrying around a fake clipping. Anybody can cut out a paper, scribble a name, and claim they're someone. He's a con, trying to tug at your sympathy. Ethan, quick to add fuel to the fire, chimed in that he'd seen men like David all his life. Big talkers, good-for-nothings. He told the story over beers at the bar, adding dramatic flair to paint David as some washed-up drunk trying to scam people. Soon, townsfolk repeated the rumors with ease, laughter laced with cruelty while David remained quiet, spending his days fixing small things no one else noticed. Loose bolts on benches, broken hinges on gates, squeaky wheels on carts. Mayor Thomas Green, a wealthy man who wore his disdain for street people on his sleeve, was far more concerned with appearances. He had been planning a large charity racing event to draw sponsors and bring prestige to the town. Standing at the courthouse steps, he proudly announced the event, promising fast cars, flashing lights, and media attention. The crowd cheered at the spectacle of it all, already buzzing with excitement. In the back, Ethan smirked, raising his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, maybe we should let the homeless guy drive. Says he's some big racer, right? Could be fun watching him try." The crowd erupted in laughter, feeding on the joke. Even the mayor smiled condescendingly, waving the suggestion away like one swats at a fly dot. Later that evening, Charlotte found David sitting near the alley, patching up his cart with string. She knelt down, speaking gently but firmly. "I know who you are. I've read your story. David Cole, the man who once owned the track. The world thought you vanished, but you're right here. Why are you hiding?" David's hands stilled, his eyes lowering. He avoided her gaze, his voice rough with shame. "That man died years ago, along with my family. What's left of him isn't worth remembering." Charlotte pressed, her tone soft but unrelenting. "People need to know the truth. You're not just a drifter, you're a legend." But David shook his head, retreating into silence, unwilling to let the world open wounds he had buried. The following day, the streets buzzed with preparations for the charity race. Banners hung, engines roared in practice, and sponsors strutted with pride. Ethan saw his chance to humiliate David once more. Surrounded by a group of townsfolk outside. "The diner!" He raised his voice, making sure the words carried. "Hey, Cole, you keep talking like you've handled engines at 200 miles an hour. Prove it. Come to the charity track and show us you're more than just stories and scraps." Laughter burst around him, the crowd leaning into the mockery. Some clapped Ethan on the back, enjoying the show. David stood in the shadows, silent, his jaw tight, but his eyes betraying the storm within. The weight of his past and the sting of their cruelty pressed heavy on him, but he offered no reply. He simply turned away, leaving the jeers ringing in the air, while Charlotte and Lila exchanged a glance that said more than words ever could. They knew he was more than what the town believed, and the day was coming when everyone else would. The morning of the charity race was alive with noise and color. Vendors lined the fences, the smell of hot dogs and popcorn drifting over the roar of engines warming up. Families gathered in the bleachers, children wearing caps with the name of their idol stitched across the front, Ryan the Bullet Johnson. His posters covered the town in the weeks leading up to the event, showing him with his trademark grin and thumbs-up pose beside gleaming race cars. To the people here, Ryan wasn't just a racer. He was their champion, their pride. In the shadows, sitting alone near the chain-link fence, David Cole looked like he didn't belong. His clothes were still worn, his cart tucked beside him. Most passed by without a glance, or worse, with smirks and whispers. Ryan strutted across the lot like he owned it. A cocky smile spread across his face. Spotting David, he seized the moment to put on a show. "Well, well," Ryan called out, his voice booming across the crowd. "If it isn't the town's handyman. Tell me, old man, are you here to fix bikes for scraps or just watch a reel? Racer show you how it's done?" Laughter followed, echoing across the stands. David didn't rise to the bait, only folding his hands quietly on his lap, his eyes steady. Ryan's smirk grew wider, feeding off the crowd's amusement. Among the organizers was Helen Brooks, a sharp businesswoman in a tailored suit, sunglasses hiding eyes that never missed an opportunity. She thrived on spectacle, on anything that drew attention and headlines. Watching the scene unfold, she leaned toward the event committee. "Let him try," she said with a smirk. "The crowd loves a circus. Put him in a car for a practice run. Everyone will get a good laugh, and Ryan will shine even brighter." The suggestion spread quickly, and within minutes, murmurs turned into cheers. The idea of watching a ragged drifter behind the wheel was irresistible entertainment. When the offer reached David, he hesitated, his expression unreadable. But the quiet murmur of Charlotte's encouragement and Lila's hopeful eyes finally pushed him forward. "All right," he said softly. The organizers wasted no time leading him to the pit. A mechanic handed him a helmet half-heartedly, clearly, expecting him to fumble. Ryan leaned casually against his own car, grinning. "Try not to stall it, Grandpa," he jeered, earning more laughter. David, unbothered, stepped toward the car set aside for him. Before climbing in, he ran his fingers across the hood, then leaned into the engine bay. His hands moved with instinctive precision, checking wires, tightening bolts, adjusting a loose valve that had gone unnoticed. The mechanics exchanged uneasy glances. He was seeing details they had overlooked. One of them whispered, "He knows what he's doing," but none dared say it louder. David's movements carried the confidence of a man who had spent a lifetime with machines, listening to them breathe like living creatures. When he finally lowered himself into the driver's seat, something changed in his posture. The slump of a weary drifter straightened into the poise of someone who belonged here. The engine growled to life beneath his touch, smoother after his quick adjustments. The crowd expected a joke, a slow crawl, a clumsy attempt. But the moment he rolled onto the track, the atmosphere shifted. David took the first lap slow, feeling the car's rhythm, the grip of the tires, the curve of the track beneath him. Then, without warning, he accelerated, the car shooting forward with breathtaking grace. His hands danced on the wheel, every motion precise and fluid. Corners that tripped up younger racers he handled with ease, gliding through them as though the car itself was part of him. The sound of the engine wasn't forced or strained. It sang under his control, and the crowd's laughter died quickly, replaced by stunned silence. People leaned forward, their eyes wide, recognizing something they hadn't expected to see. Old fans, men who had once followed racing in their youth, exchanged knowing looks. "That style. I've seen it before," one whispered. "That's David Cole." Each lap he completed seemed to confirm it. He wasn't just driving, he was performing, reminding the world of who he had once been. Meanwhile, Ryan's confident grin faltered. He watched from the sidelines, arms crossed tighter than before, irritation flickering in his eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen. The drifter was supposed to be a joke, not a revelation. Helen Brooks, on the other hand, leaned forward eagerly, her mind already calculating headlines and dollar signs. "A legend reborn," she murmured to herself. This was better than she could have planned. As David pulled back into the pit, the silence hung heavy for a moment before a ripple of murmurs spread through the stands. Shock, disbelief, awe. It was all there. David removed the helmet slowly, his face calm as though nothing unusual had happened. But to the crowd, everything had changed. The man they mocked had just driven with a mastery they hadn't seen. In years, one of the officials cleared his throat nervously, glancing at Helen, then at Ryan. With the crowd buzzing louder and louder, there was no stopping it now. The decision was made official. David Cole would compete against Ryan the Bullet Johnson in the main race. The announcement sent a shockwave through the stands, half gasps, half cheers. For David, it wasn't about glory. For Ryan, it was about pride. For the town, it was about witnessing something they didn't yet understand, a battle between arrogance and redemption. And as David quietly stepped back into the shadows, the stakes had never been higher. The afternoon sun cast golden light. Across the track, the bleachers packed with spectators buzzing with excitement. Flags waved, cameras clicked, and the roar of engines echoed like thunder. At the starting line, Ryan the Bullet Johnson revved his car aggressively, smirking at the crowd that chanted his name. He glanced sideways at David, seated calmly in his car, his face composed, his hands steady on the wheel. Ryan leaned toward him with a mocking grin. "Try to keep up, old man. Don't stall out in front of everyone." David said nothing, his silence sharper than any retort. The signal lights flickered from red to green, and the race exploded to life. Ryan shot forward like a rocket, his tires screeching, leaving a trail of smoke behind him. The crowd roared at the display, convinced their hero was untouchable. David, however, rolled forward at a measured pace, not rushing, not faltering, his car gliding smoothly into rhythm. His eyes scanned every curve, every shadow on the asphalt, as though memorizing the language of the track. Where Ryan chased speed, David studied the road like a strategist, waiting for the right moment. By the third lap, Ryan had created a massive lead, his car screaming through the corners recklessly, pushing limits to dazzle the crowd. He waved arrogantly at the stands as he passed, soaking in the cheers. "He's nothing but a warm-up act," Ryan shouted over his radio to his crew, laughing at the thought of humiliating David further. But while the crowd cheered for Ryan's daring display, the few with trained eyes noticed the difference. Ryan was fast but wild, burning through his tires while David was deliberate, smooth, every move calculated like a chessmaster. Mid-dash race. Ryan's arrogance got the better of him. Coming into a sharp turn, he cut too close, trying to show off by overtaking a lap with dangerous flair. His rear tire clipped the edge of the curb, sending the car fishtailing wildly. The crowd gasped as the vehicle wobbled dangerously, skidding inches from the barrier. Gasps turned to silence, but at the last second, Ryan regained control, pushing forward with a grin that masked his shaken nerves. Behind him, David handled the same curve with surgical precision, his car hugging the line so tightly it looked effortless. Where Ryan fought the machine, David danced with it. As the laps ticked down, David began to close the gap. His engine purred, steady and relentless, gaining ground not with bursts of reckless speed but with mastery. The crowd leaned forward, murmurs spreading like wildfire. They had come to laugh, but now awe replaced ridicule. "He's catching him," someone whispered. "Look at his control." The murmurs grew, and some older spectators began to recognize the style. Fluid, graceful, unmistakable. "That's David Cole," one man said with conviction. "I saw him race in Monaco. That's him." The name rippled through the stands, and excitement turned to reverence. By the final lap, Ryan looked in his rearview mirror and saw the unthinkable. David closing in, steady as a storm. Panic set in. He pushed harder, his car rattling under. The strain, his tires screaming in protest. Sweat dripped down his forehead, his cocky grin replaced with clenched teeth. David, by contrast, looked serene, every move precise, his eyes locked on the track. Coming into the last corner, Ryan tried to block him, swerving wide to cut off the inside lane. But David anticipated it, slipping to the outside with breathtaking timing. In a blur of motion, he surged past, his car gliding ahead with elegance. Born of mastery, the finish line rushed forward, and in a heartbeat, it was over. David's car crossed first, smooth and controlled, while Ryan trailed behind, defeated. For a moment, there was silence, a stunned pause where the crowd tried to comprehend what they had witnessed. Then the eruption came. Cheers, shouts, applause. That shook the stands. They weren't cheering for Ryan anymore. They were on their feet for David Cole, the man they had mocked, the legend they thought lost. Reporters swarmed as David stepped out of the car, removing his helmet. Flashbulbs lit his face, now recognized by all. Microphones pushed toward him, voices overlapping with questions. David raised a hand gently, his words calm but powerful. "Yes," he said, "I am David Cole. But I didn't come here for trophies or headlines. I lost everything once, and I learned that I didn't need fame to survive. I didn't need glory. What I needed was kindness, and that's the hardest thing to find." His voice trembled only slightly, his eyes glistening with memories too, heavy to put into words. In the crowd, Jake and Ethan stood frozen, shame painted across their faces. The men who had mocked him, laughed at his hunger, now saw him for who he truly was. They couldn't meet his eyes. Lila stood near the pit, tears in her own, pride swelling in her chest as she clapped louder than anyone. Charlotte scribbled furiously in her notebook, already crafting the headline that would tell the world not just about a race, but about redemption. When offers came, sponsorships, money, opportunities, David shook his head. He didn't want to return to the spotlight. Instead, he asked only for a chance to live quietly, to work, to belong. And the town, humbled and moved, rallied around him. A small house was offered, jobs passed his way, neighbors stepping forward with genuine kindness where once there had been ridicule. As the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed over the track, the narrator's voice lingered in the silence. Sometimes, legends don't vanish. They walk among us, waiting for the day they're remembered, not for their victories, but for their humanity.